recently Rules 1.5 rules reference has dropped over on Fantasy Flight Games. This is something we've been waiting for like 2 years. It's absolutely huge news. There's some big takeaways, some big things to note, and I guess some of the bigger things right off the bat that you need to know is that very few things have actually changed. One thing that has changed is getting a lot of attention, which is a little bit weird, but there's also a lot of updates in the rule book now to show you timing charts and how things should flow and whatever. And like these are huge updates and these are really good. And there's a lot going on, and we're not gonna have time to cover it all. So I want to do a quick shout out to Josh from Get Up and Game and Nelson with Nelson All Over Cards. They each have done a video on this already, and I'll link both of those down below so you can check them out, because we're probably going to cover slightly different things on a lot of it. And Josh especially goes into like a lot of detail on things. We're probably not going to go into much detail as he has, but I wanted to point those out in case you're like, hey, I still have more questions. Watch their videos as well to check it out. So let's start with actually the rules page, right? The news announcement, because I think there's some important notes there, and I think it's confusing a lot of people. I think that's a good place to start. Here is the rules announcement page on May 18th, and they kind of go to the beginning of the intro and all this stuff, and we'll read through a decent amount of this, but it's important. You'll see why in a second. So the Marvel Champions, the card game design team is delighted to present you with version 1.5 of our online rules reference. Really exciting, really cool. For those that remember, 1.4 changed like how defense works and like how you can defend, basically using defense cards counts as like defending, which was like a huge change in the game and changed a lot of things. So a lot of people are really excited about it for various reasons, but that was kind of one of the reasons, like, is something major going to change? And it kind of does, and we'll get into that in a second. With nearly 2,000 unique cards in the game, you're bound to have some questions about how one or more cards interact with rules of the game. So rules reference update, we have added, expanded, revised many game terms and definitions in an effort to help you more seamlessly find the answers to these questions. Now, this is also important too, because for those that don't know, Hall of Heroes has a whole ruling section where basically people have asked them questions and they list it all out. I used to pay attention to this. I really don't anymore, because there have been times that they have made changes and gone back on those changes and then put those changes back in, and they've made up new rules, and it's very convoluting, confusing. Now, if you follow them, that's great, and a lot of the changes that are in 1.5 will make sense to you because they've already been done in the Hall of Heroes. But those of you who are like me, who kind of wait for the new rules reference, that's more or less the bigger changes, right? That you'll see. But they've just consolidated everything, and it's good. So we want to discuss some of the more impactful changes in this update and give you context about why they were made. So change of the game. One fundamental rule of Marvel Champions is the ability is that an ability must quote unquote change the game in order to be initiated. This seemingly simple rule led to many questions about what exactly qualifies as changing the game. Perhaps more importantly, this rule could sometimes feel overly constraining on the players and the limit of their creativity to finding fun card combinations. And this is true. There was a lot of times when people would wonder if they could kind of do something, and did it really change the game? Did it change it enough? Was it too much? Like, there were so many questions around what changing the game meant, because some people took it as changing it to just the hero. Some people meant that you had to change the on the table presence. Some people meant that you had to change like a deck or something like that. It was really, really weird. And it does sound very simple, but when you actually start playing the game, it gets kind of convoluted and complicated. So they were making the change to that, which is kind of good. However, we did not want to simply remove the rules, as that could open up gameplay possibilities that would break the sense of immersion the game provides. I want to just this is an important sentence, and I'll show why in a second, because again, I want to stress that what they've done with 1.5 is 99% good. And I think there's like 1% bad. And I know we're going to focus a little bit more on the bad stuff, but I want people to understand that like this rule book and what they're doing is fantastic. It's much needed. It's really, really helpful. I really love it. But there's some annoying things with it. And this sentence in particular. Allowing heroes to punch non-existent minions or investigate non-existing side schemes just feels silly and detracts from the story being told through the gameplay. Cool. With those considerations in mind, we have replaced the change the game rules with narrow targeting rules. Any ability that requires a target must have a valid target in order to be initiated. Makes sense, right? You want to attack a minion? There has to be a minion in which to attack. Sounds simple. Excuse me. For example, an attack event that only targets a minion must have a minion to target in order to be played. If an ability requires more than one target, it only needs to have a single target in order to be played. This means that melee, which do they show melee? Oh yeah, they should do. Okay, so melee is a deal 3 damage to an enemy, deal 3 damage to another enemy. Can still be played even if you only have the villain to attack. This was another rules question with a lot of people, because a lot of people were like, no, it says another one, so you can't attack the same villain twice. And a lot of people were just doing it anyway because they felt that's what it meant. So they're basically consolidating that to say that, basically, as long as you have a valid target, you're good, right? Even if it would double up like that. So what qualifies as a valid target? In short, it is any target that can be affected by the ability. For example, Get Ready can only target an exhausted ally. Here you go. Get Ready, ready an ally. Makes sense. And For Justice can only target a scheme with at least one threat on it. This isn't a true sentence of what they're about to say here. We will dive into this for a second, but this is actually not a true sentence, and they need to clarify this because there are some issues with this. So we'll get into that in a second. If an ability has more than one effect, a target is valid if at least one of those effects would affect the target. For example, Concussive Blow, and for those who want to see it, confuse an enemy. If you pay for this card using a fist resource, deal 3 damage to the enemy. Can target an already confused enemy as long as you pay for it with a physical resource in order to do the damage to the enemy. Which actually, this is a really good change I like, because there were times that I would already have a confused or a stunned enemy, and the card would be like, you have to stun the enemy. And it was really frustrating that I couldn't do that with some cards, or like at least how I read the rules, you couldn't do that. So it's nice that they're clarifying that you can still play that card. That's a very, very good change. That's great to see. Additionally, you do not need to take account the cost of the ability when determining whether the ability can affect the target, though you must still be able to pay the cost in order to initiate the ability. For example, what doesn't kill me? Okay, so it's the requirement of the fist, heal 2 damage from your hero, ready your hero. For example, has an additional cost of 2 healing from your hero and an effect of readying your hero. If your hero is already ready, you cannot play What Doesn't Kill Me because your hero is not a valid target for a readying effect. Even if What Doesn't Kill Me can affect your hero by healing damage from it, you also cannot play What Doesn't Kill Me if your hero is exhausted but at full health, right? So this is important to note. Before, back in the day, it was basically as long as you paid the first half of this arrow, you're good, right? You can do whatever the second half is. Now what they're saying is if you can't do the second half, the first half can't be done either. Thus, the card can't be done, right? You are not an exhausted hero, so the card doesn't work. Now, this makes sense for the example they're using. There is something that people have already found that kind of gets around this and doesn't work, I think, how they want it to work. And we'll talk a little bit about it in a little while. But there's kind of like a weird loophole with this. And to be fair, with most of these rules, there's always going to be loopholes. That's just how it is. All right, so then the permanent keyword has received some refinements in order for it to function more as intended, which is fantastic to hear. We have clarified that cards with the permanent keyword do not count towards players' hand size, or players' minimum or maximum deck size, which is fantastic because this was always like a weird question that came up constantly. Does this count? Does it not? People were like using different rules all the time. This is very, very nice to clarify this. This is because those cards are never shuffled in the player's deck or in counter deck and are instead set aside the starter setup. No longer will Wolverine be unable to get his claws out of his hand, which is phenomenal, right? Absolutely phenomenal. Here, I've done videos on this in the past. This was a big rules thing, and they doubled down the rules, and it was a big controversy and whatever. They finally fixed it. It's good. You can't get rid of Wolverine's claws, which makes logical sense. Okay, set for success with 35 scenarios now released, each of them with their own unique setup conditions. We felt it was important to formalize the setup process more fully to ensure players can set up the game as intended. The updated setup instructions now includes steps for campaign setup and the setup keyword, which is big because that was kind of introduced maybe not later on, but was introduced a bit later on, and got really important with when do you do campaign setup, when do you not do it, all that fun stuff. So it's now clarified, which is really, really cool. They also clarified the order in which main scheme and villain setup and when revealed abilities should be resolved. Really cool because there's always a lot of questions about when revealed actually takes place and when it doesn't take place and all that fun stuff. So it's nice that they're clarifying that. In the process of developing all these scenarios and playing countless games of Marvel Champions, we have observed how players, including ourselves, tend to set up the game in practice and how that differs from the rules as written. This is them alluding to rules as written versus rules as intended, right? And this is always a fierce battle in the community is, do you play rules as written or rules as intended? I generally like to play rules as intended, or what I think is intended, but we don't ever know what the intention is fully because they won't tell us the intention because they want to do rules as written, which makes sense because it's easier to give you a new kind of ruling in the future. Right now, it's written this way. You follow the rules. It's logically makes sense. But there are some of us, me included, that always likes to do rules as intended because to me, it's sometimes obvious, such as Wolverine's claws, even if they ruled the other way because they were trying to be consistent in their rulings, which I get, it's obvious what the intent was supposed to be. It was just an overlooked error. All right, so, in order to create all these scenarios, playing countless games, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Instead of a game, we combined the create the encounter deck and shuffle the encounter deck steps into a single step, which is really nice. Basically, technically, your what is it, your obligation, I guess, should have, like, when you shuffle and do all the setup stuff like that, you should never be able to discard your obligation, so it would get shuffled in later. This is something I always did, and I would get yelled at because sometimes my obligation would get discarded, and people would be like, no, that's not what the rules say. Well, they've now combined it, so that is what happens, right? You can discard your obligation. It's a big change, and it's a good change. So there's a bunch of erratas, and we want to put a deal of effort into making sure that the language in every component of the game is understandable, consistent, and grammatical. But there's always going to be mistakes that make it through, which is fine. That is where the errata comes in. Because there have been 21 products released in nearly 2 years, which is crazy. It has been, since it has been our last rules reference update, excuse me, we have a fair number of new errata for this update. Most are minor technical edits that won't change the function of a card, but there are a handful of benefits for long-term health of the game that we'd like to address. So Cosmo was originally written to allow him to interact with any deck of the game. Many players have found him an invaluable companion for Doctor Strange's Invocation deck. However, we have found over time that this flexibility creates obstacles where we are trying to design scenarios or heroes who have a special deck that would be negatively affected by Cosmo's ability. For that reason, we have decided to restrict Cosmo's ability to only affecting player decks and the encounter deck, which still provides him a great deal of flexibility. So a lot of people, what they were doing was, to make sure Cosmo got no consequential damage, they were just calling out, here you can see the card. When Cosmo attacks or thwarts, name a card type. So I think it's an event always in the invocation deck. So you just say, an event or whatever. And then you wouldn't have to ever take consequential damage with Cosmo. It also let you get through your invocation deck faster, right? So if there was a bad card in the invocation deck that didn't work, it let you get through it faster, so it's kind of a way to exploit it. James Rhodes' ability to shuffle War Machine events back into his deck was always intended to be limited once per phase, but the limit was omitted. It has now been added. This was always a weird rule. We talked about this recently on a Reddit reply. I don't know why they forgot the text, but they did originally, but now it says limit once per phase. Cool. Go for Champions is one of the most powerful cards. So basically, no one takes damage at the end of each round. They now have done it that now states, go for Champions card in the deck, can trivialize an intention because you can recall this card. You can use it over and over. So basically they said that you can use it once per game, and that's it. And then it gets excluded from the game, right? And that's it. So anyway, then they give you a whole contact form that you can talk to them about the rules if you have any questions and anything like that, which is super helpful and super nice. Now, if you actually click on the actual rules update, right, it brings you to this page. This is the rules reference 1.5, and these are kind of the important things you need to see right away, right? These are summary changes and valid target and all this fun stuff. So one of the things I alluded to a little bit ago was how they made a comment. Let's find it really fast with that. Where is it? For justice can only target a scheme with at least one threat on it. And we'll see that this is actually not the case. You can actually get around this. And I feel like this is just poor wording in the article, and I don't blame them, but I get what they're trying to say, but there is actually a way that this does work. So, for example, under this page 34, under stun and stunned. Stun is the status effect that prevents the character from dealing damage with its next attack. Okay, cool. Character is stunned if it has a status card. That makes sense. Whatever. Okay. A stunned character can attempt to attack or use an attack ability even if there are no enemies that can be attacked. Right? So that's kind of huge. A stunned character can attempt to attack or use an attack ability even if there are no enemies that can be attacked. This has led people to realize that you can use Get Over Here and deal 1 damage to a minion even if there are no minions to clear your stun. Because again, it doesn't need an enemy to be attacked. It states right there, it does not need an enemy. Now, I'm going to assume that they're going to correct this at some point and say that you can't use that card in particular. But as the ruling states, you could do something like that. On top of that, with confused and confused, right? Again, a confused character can attempt to thwart or use a thwart ability even if there are no schemes that can be thwarted. So you can use for justice if there's zero threat on things, right? To clear out your confused. That is something you can do right now. And this is one of the weirder rules that kind of goes against its front page. And I think was a lot of people were getting confused by. This kind of contradicts itself. It's kind of a little frustrating how they're doing this, but it is what it is. But that is one of the bigger, more confusing rule things that you kind of have to like take note of that you can do. It doesn't happen often, so it's not going to be something you have to worry about all the time, but it will happen now and again. So it's just important to make a mental note of that. Okay, so one of the erratas we have to bring up is the Wolverine. That is just new setup. Put Wolverine's claws into play. For those that don't remember, Wolverine setup was this: the whole search your deck and discard pile for Wolverine's claws, upgrade and put it into play. These are the claws and all that fun stuff. So now it just goes into play. You don't have to worry about mulliganing or anything like that. Really good to see. I'm happy they finally fixed that. That's very, very good. One of the other things I want to bring up, this is on page 5, is this timing sheet, timing list. And to me, this is one of the most important lists you can have in the game. And if you're going to take anything from this rules set that you think really clarifies things and makes things better, this is probably going to be one of the big ones, because a lot of questions about the game come off of this, essentially. So some abilities have timing priority over other abilities. In order, the timing priorities of abilities with the same triggering condition is, so constant abilities comes first, right? So a lot of times on text or on card, the top text, it won't have like an action next to it or anything like that. It'll just be text on top of it. That always comes first. Then keywords and the different icons, right? Technically, it's all in the same exact level, but I'm personally going to read it as like in order, right? They wrote it in order for a reason. I'm going to assume that's it. Then status cards, right? So a tough status card, stun, whatever is next. Force interrupt, then regular interrupt, then boost, then when defeated and revealed, boost when defeated, when revealed, all comes next. Forced responses, and then consequential damage. And this is kind of huge because a lot of people were wondering, like, if your ally attacks somebody and does something and like you still have like, a token on it and it has the ability to attack and stun. Does it still stun if it's going to knock itself out due to consequential damage? Yes, right? It will still do it. Consequential damage is the very last thing that happens in the game. Now, this isn't actually new, but it's the first time that's been this rule book written out, very clear, very concise. To me, this is one of the bigger things to really take note of. Again, on page 5 of the rule book, just memorize this timing chart. I think it's going to help a lot of people, and it's going to make the game a lot simpler for a lot more people, which is really great. It's really cool to see. Personally, for me, this section, what page is this? Page 9 is a huge one for me, because my issue is the word you and dealing with you with allies, because that always kind of confuses me constantly. And if you ever watch my live streams over on Twitch or on YouTube, you'll notice that a lot of times I get stumbled through this. They've added this section on page 9. This is something that I will refer to constantly. So attacks against allies. Some effects cause an ally or minion to attack an ally directly. When this occurs, any undefended damage from the attack is placed on the ally that was attacked. Any boost abilities that refer to you refer to the player who controls the attacked ally. This was always a big one, right? People would be like, oh, well, it's attacking my ally, but then someone comes up with you. Is the you now the ally? No, the you is still you, the player, right? And it's important to know. Abilities that trigger when the attacking enemy attacks you do not trigger, which is kind of huge, right? This was another confusing thing for me. Again, I had several instances where something would trigger and attack me, but would it still do it because it never did? Now we know they do not trigger. Players may defend these attacks as normal by declaring the hero or an ally as defender. Okay, cool. If the attack has overkill and defeats an ally, whether the ally was attacked ally or defending ally, excess damage from that is dealt to the identity of the player who controlled the defeated ally. This also came up randomly too. At times I would see like people ask questions about this on Reddit. Like if you're playing with a friend and your friend's ally takes the block, but it takes overkill, does it hit you or does it hit them? It hits them, right? They are the new defending person essentially. So this to me is a very, very just nice, clean way of dealing with you and allies, because I know most people kind of get you at this point, but this cleans up, I think, a lot of things for me personally. So I'm really excited about this section. Next up is the permanent keyword. They talked about how they made clarifications to this, and actually it's kind of funny because with the way permanent works now, they didn't need to actually do all the setup stuff with Wolverine's claws, but it doesn't really matter. I'd rather than do it overkill than not. But a card with a permanent keyword cannot be defeated, leave play, or have any part of its text box blanked except by card abilities in the same set, hero set, scenario set, or module set. This is important for a lot of people that had like what was it, like Spectrum has 3 phases, right? And you turn 2 down, and people were like, well, you can't turn them down because they're out of play. It can now go out of play if the hero themselves puts it out of play, right? This kind of clarifies that. A lot of people had issues with that because it didn't make sense. So now permanent keywords can go out of play, right? Can leave play or have any part of its text box blank except by card abilities in the same hero set, right? So the hero set says you can do it, it can do it, right? For example, an ability on the hero card can cause a permanent card with that hero's set to leave play, as we just discussed. Permanent cards are set aside at the start of step 1 of setup. Cool, very good. Permanent cards do not count towards players' minimum or maximum deck size. Cool. Permanent cards are not valid targets for card effects. This was also brought up a lot. Like, was it caught off guard, right? Could caught off guard get rid of like Wolverine's claws or some other permanent keyword card? No, it can't. So cool. A permanent card would be targeted by such an effect. That effect instead targets the non-permanent card that fits the criteria. Players eliminated from the game, whatever. Again, this is just Wolverine's claws with the permanent keyword. So again, it's put aside. So he doesn't even need the setup, that the new setup, which would be put Wolverine's claws in play. Technically, it doesn't even need that anymore, that setup word, because the permanent ruling clarifies that already. But it's 2 things that do the same exact thing. It's fine. I'm happy I'd rather them do that than not do anything. So one of the other things that was mentioned was the what doesn't kill me example, right? And that basically has initial cost of 2 healing from your hero and an effect of readying your hero. If your hero is already, you cannot play what doesn't kill me because your hero doesn't have a valid target for readying the effect. Even if what doesn't kill me can affect your hero by healing damage from it, right? So with this card, what they're saying is, even if you have 2 damage on your hero and can pay the cost, you can't ready your hero if your hero is already readied up. So thus, you can't use the card. Well, people have figured out with superhuman strength in what is this, She-Hulk's deck, that She-Hulk gets +2 attack, right? It's a forced response. After She-Hulk attacks, discard superhuman strength, stun the attacked enemy. What people have noticed now is if the enemy that you're attacking is already stunned, you can't do the second half of this. Thus, you can't do the forced response. I feel like this wasn't what they really wanted to do. It wasn't the intent of it, but that is the kind of the effect from the rules. Now, there isn't many things like this, which is kind of nice, but it is important to note that cards like this now, that if you're attacking a stunned enemy and it can't be stunned again, you wouldn't have to discard this card. So She-Hulk would get +2 attack continuously, right? So it would be more attack for She-Hulk, which is good. It kind of gives a huge buff to She-Hulk. I mean, She-Hulk was pretty decent already, but this is kind of really nice if you work more with like stun type decks and you're attacking a certain enemy over and over. So that's kind of cool. Kind of nice to see, but it does kind of throw a wrinkle in the things that, like, I don't think that's how the card was intended to play, but it's what you can do now. So She-Hulk buff, yay. But I don't know if that's really what they wanted to happen. Also, really quick note on the bottom here. It's really funny that they specifically asked this question and the developer ruling was like, no, you must discard it. But I'm pretty sure this is an older ruling and not a newer one, because technically now it would, based off of their own rulings now. So it's kind of funny they ruled the opposite way before, but now it would be this way in the future. So that's fun. Or maybe that's not the case. One of the other things I'll point out really fast is just the appendix to setup. How the game is actually set up. They made a change into 8 with the scenario, all that fun stuff. Create the encounter deck, shuffle the encounter deck, list on side 1A of the main scheme with the obligation card set aside during step 4, which step 4 is set aside obligations. So basically, when you create the encounter deck the first time, it all gets done in there, right? So then put setup cards into play, search each deck and set aside area for any cards with the setup keyword and put them into play. Resolve scenario setup and one reveal ability. So again, there are certain scenarios where like you discard from the top of the deck until something happens, right? So now you can discard your obligation. So here we go. Resolve any setup instructions on the main scheme of 1A. Flip the main scheme to side 1B and resolve any one revealed. resolve any when revealed abilities on the villain. And then campaign setup is then done near the end, and then you draw your cards from your deck until you have your hand size, mulligans, and then you do your setup abilities, right? So that's cool. All right, so those are the bigger rules stuff going on. There are others that are out there. There's some more changes they made. A lot of errata that you can go through, pages 54 through 56 on that page. We'll kind of have a lot of that stuff. In the back of the booklet is a lot of FAQ stuff, which is really useful to look at. There's some changes. And like I said, I kind of harped a little bit on the way that the Word document was written in the beginning and some of the rules and some of the things that like don't really 100% make sense to me, don't line up great. And I don't love it, right? I don't love the way that they're doing certain things like that. I think they will be exceptions and not the rules. And what I mean by that is that there's gonna be very few instances, with the exception of maybe Get Over Here, where you can play with a no minion. But like for Justice, realistically, especially for me, there's always probably going to be a threat on a scheme somewhere, so I could still play it regardless. But as the rules are written right now, even though it contradicts what the article says, which again I think confused a lot of people, the rules as they're written, there actually doesn't need to be main threat in the main scheme in order to thwart, right? Which confuses people. It does confuse people because again, there's no valid target except the confuse, I guess, is the target. I don't know. It's very, very confusing, and I kind of wish they would have just worded this differently or done it a little bit differently. But I feel like there's a lot of confusion around that, so that's why we kind of focus on that a bit in the beginning. But yeah, overall, I mean, these rule changes are good, right? They're good for the health of the game. They're good for the longevity of the game. The charts are super helpful, right? There's some other charts with different things in there too. They're super helpful. Them clarifying things is really, really good. They got pretty much everything clarified, concise. Fixing the permanent keyword is huge. It's super important. I'm very, very happy they did that, because that will solve a lot of issues down the road too, I'm sure. So overall, very good stuff. Very, very good stuff. If I didn't say it already, I'll link the rules, this article and the rule set down below in the description. Definitely check it out when you have time. But it's nice. It's nice that this is now fixed for now. Of course, there are going to be more issues that come up in the future. We will see that. There's going to be weird rulings. There's going to be weird things going on as they explore the design space more and more. And that's fine. That's okay. And we'll talk about those rulings in the future as well. But it's, again, nice that we haven't had an update for almost about 2 years. So to finally get that together is really great. Let me know down in the comments if there are any rules that I missed that you're like, wow, no, these are huge rules and you should have talked about them. Because I'm sure there are. I'm sure there are some. Because there was again, not a lot of changes if you've been following Hall of Heroes, but if you haven't been following Hall of Heroes, it's a lot of changes. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully this helps things out. Like I said, make sure to check out Josh's and Nelson's videos, because they go into other stuff and they have some important big stuff in there as well. And if you made it this far, like, subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff. Really appreciate it. See you all next time.